The Honourable Member Ian Lees-Galloway.
I'll have to write down that contribution from Jamie Lee Ross after I finished mine. That was astonishingly short. I can understand members' reticence to make a contribution on this bill, but I think we do owe it to the public to at least discuss the contents of the bill, discuss what it is designed to do. It may be something that we as members feel a little uncomfortable discussing in front of the public, but the fact that it makes us feel a little uncomfortable discussing it probably ought to be one of the reasons why we do actually have a proper debate about this Members of Parliament Remuneration and Services Bill. So the purpose of this bill is to establish a new framework for setting entitlements for Members of Parliament and the Executive. It repeals the Civil List Act 1979 and changes the law regarding to the salaries and allowances of Members of Parliament, the support services provided for Members of Parliament, ministers and certain electoral candidates, the annuities and other benefits and privileges for former Prime Ministers, and the benefits and privileges for former Members of Parliament. So, and essentially what that all means is that it modernises the regime for giving Members of Parliament and Members of the Executive the resources and tools we require to carry out the tasks of being a Member of Parliament and being a representative of the people of New Zealand. And a number of members those who have contributed to the debate today have said how these things have changed over time. And it's for one reason why the regime for pay and support services for MPs has changed is a desire for greater transparency, a desire expressed both by the public and by Members of Parliament. But another reason is simply the fact that the environment in which Members of Parliament operate now and the expectations of Members of Parliament have changed over the years. There was a time when Members of Parliament did not receive resources to open an office in their electorate. They did not receive resources to staff offices in their electorate office and to provide services to their constituents. Most Members of Parliament did. They either funded it themselves or they relied on volunteers, often members of their family, to provide those services to their constituents. A decision was made, pleasingly, some decades ago, that was not adequate and our constituents deserved better service than that, and so resources were provided to Members of Parliament in order to provide those services. Likewise, with the advent of air travel and other forms of travel, it was deemed appropriate that Members of Parliament should not only be able to travel to and from Wellington to carry out their functions here as a legislator, but also to be able to travel around the country to carry out their functions as a representative, because we don't just represent the people of our constituencies, although those of us who are electorate Members of Parliament, that is our primary function, I believe, to represent those constituents. But we also it is incumbent on us to make sure that we are representing the interests of people across the country. And most of us hold portfolios of one or another, and it is a requirement that we travel around and actually speak to the people working in those areas so that we actually have a grasp of what is happening at the front line, what is happening in reality, and we don't get stuck in the ivory tower that is the parliamentary complex. So Ms. Street suggests that Nelson might also be an ivory tower. So these resources are very much made available to Members of Parliament so that we can provide the services that are expected of us. Another more recent innovation is the internet and email. Now, I'm sure all MPs, just like probably most other people in New Zealand, workers in New Zealand, have a love-hate relationship with emails. They certainly give constituents far better access to us, certainly much faster usually, to email your Member of Parliament and hopefully get a timely response from them rather than relying on old-fashioned mail. But that, of course, means that we have to be resourced in order to provide that service, that we have to be accessible and available to our constituents. And that ultimately is what the resources side of this is about. Of course, it is also about ensuring that members of Parliament are reasonably recompensed for the work that they do. And as Chris Hipkins rightly pointed out, I think, that it is about striking a balance between ensuring that someone does not need to be independently wealthy, they do not need to be a rich person in order to enter the Houses of Parliament, because it is a House of Representatives. We ought to represent the whole diversity of our nation, rich, poor, old, young, ethnicities of all variety, backgrounds of all varieties, careers of all varieties. And if we were to overly restrict the remuneration of members of Parliament, that would limit the different kinds of people who could come into this place. Nor should you come to Parliament in order to become rich. That is not a reason to seek election and to seek to represent the people that you purport to represent. And I think we have, over the years, come up with systems that do strike that balance appropriately. However, members of Parliament are well remunerated when compared with most people in New Zealand. And I think we have to acknowledge that whilst we think it is a fair remuneration, we are amongst the top income earners in New Zealand, and it is understandable that there is scrutiny and an expectation that we will be absolutely transparent about what we earn and the way we use the resources that are available to us. So, what does the key changes in this legislation are around improving transparency, are around ensuring that we have the right matters dealt with by the Remuneration Authority and the right matters dealt with by the Speaker. Particularly, I think it's important that members of Parliament acknowledge that our primary function when the House is sitting is to be here in the House legislating. That is our job. Now, it's not to say that there aren't good, valid reasons why some of us, for some of the time, need to be away from the House. But our primary role is to pass legislation. That is actually what we are sent here to do. That is what people elect us to do. And one of the key changes that this legislation allows for is the penalties for being away from Parliament without good reason, without the authority of the party whips or the Speaker, depending on, there are different regimes for different people, whether they be independent, small parties or part of a larger party. And it's true that the penalty system that was in place before really had no impact. There was no incentive to carry out our primary functions and be here in the House under the old system. The new system certainly does create an incentive for members of Parliament to be here, and with it will come a new regime where we're now all going to be checked off to make sure that we are here in Parliament, to ensure that at least some point in time in the day we make an appearance here in the debating chamber and or we make an appearance at a select committee. And if we don't do that, that there is a good explanation for that the whips or the Speaker are aware of. And I think that does create the right incentives, and that members of public will appreciate that expectation has been built into the legislation. So I think this is good legislation. It strikes the right balance in both in terms of the remuneration of MPs, but also placing the correct responsibilities with the correct authorities so that the right decisions are made. It grants members of Parliament the tools they require to carry out the functions of this role to an adequate level, and to ensure that the constituents that we serve get the services that they expect from their members of Parliament, and I do commend this bill to the House.
I call Mike Sabin.
Mr. Speaker,